We're here today to do exactly what was not done with younger people during the EU referendum debate, because young people in Britain did not get this opportunity that you are now having. No one gave them the time of day. No one created fora like this for them. There were no podcasts like this. Nothing was done. And everyone complained about the attitude of the young, or the fact they didn't turn out, or really they got ripped off. I mean, they were told to register to vote in the area they lived in the longest, and that was their university regions. And then when they went home for the term holidays, which was just about 2 or 3 days before the poll, they got zapped by the local authorities. So there was a form of electoral corruption or dodginess going on there. The thing about Britain is that it's not a centralised state like New Zealand is. It's, by that I'm not even referring to the devolved nations, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales. It is a multiplicity of asymmetrical authorities, ranging from Whitehall, Westminster, and your normal government is often just your local body, your local police, your NHS, your local education authorities. It's a jumble of things that just don't match. It's a scattered jigsaw. This has been like this. This footprint was developed in Sir Robert Peel's time in the 1830s. It dates from the Metropolitan Police Act, 1828, the Municipal Corporations Act, 1835, and there is just this mismatch. It's just, they call it freedom. Remember the famous speech that Thomas More gives in A Man for All Seasons? He says there have to be laws, there has to be a kind of hedgerow of laws, or else the devil will get you. The English think in terms of hedgerows. All their institutions are like hedgerows. They're twiggy, they're brambly, they're a mess, but they're lovely. They have rank gardens, but we're not like that. We're very orderly. We're almost French. We're civic republican. We like order and symmetry and everything. So that's how the students got caught out. And no one takes any responsibility for failures like that. It's not a responsibilitised society of the way we think our country is here. But no one bothered to do this. There was a dearth of it, so I'm glad to be here today and to answer anything you wish to ask me about that very peculiar country and society. I mean, I've had 31 years' experience there. I went to Cambridge. I went to Peterhouse College at Cambridge, which is the Slytherin house of the Brexiteers. It's the core Brexiteer college. It's where Enoch Powell and others basically set up headquarters. It's the core culture of this sort of thing. Then later in life I went to Keble, which was a more huff and puff or Gryffindor kind of college at Oxford. So that's my experience there. My wife is British. We have 3 children, aged 9, 4 and 17 months. My wife's grandmother was a German woman who in February 1939 broke with her family and married an MI6 officer who was 28 years her senior. So as far as I'm concerned, all that is keeping my children's rights to their other homeland is, at this moment, this Irish passport. That's all at this moment that's ensuring that my children have access to their wider homeland and their wider domestic market. Now, I'm very indignant at this taking, at the taking of my children's passport and alternate citizenship. It is a taking, and it might be taken to court by people. People born into the EU, can it be taken from them? That's a worthwhile question. So, having explained my work record is that I was in ministerial services and parliamentary services for a long time. I served Bill English, I served Simon Upton, I served Dame Jennifer Shipley, I served Sir Michael Cullen and Trevor Mallard during the Foreshores crisis. I helped found the Constitutional Review of Bill English. So now I've been involved with Treasury for the past 5 years. And I've worked on Sir George Grey and constitutional themes, and I'm working right now on the hermeneutics of constitutionalism, hermeneutics of power, how you actually interpret or experience power. That's my philosophical work. So let's talk about the EU referendum and just ask any questions. The intelligence I'm receiving is that the Conservatives have divided into two camps. There are basically two trends among them. One are those that just want to do a drive-through plate glass, drive over the judder bars at high speed, take everything to the point of no return as quickly as possible, knowing full well there are going to be economic knocks if they do that. And it means the much derided emergency budget. So you see how Gove and Osborne have fallen in together. And that was unsurprising because they've long been friends. And it's one of those friendships that have not been toasted by the feud. Dave and Boris, their old Etonian friendship and Oxford friendship and Wellington Club friendship, that's toasted. But on a sort of different class level, Osborne and Gove, they're like Hansel and Gretel and kept talking. They kept channels open. So you've got a revolutionary option. The Brexiteers, they're descended from Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell was the Voldemort of British Conservative policy. He lived between 1912 and 1998. He was a kind of weird genius. He identified a way of doing Tory politics that was monetarist. He was one of the early monetarists, but he believed in creating a triangulation between the Colonel Blimps, if you like, of the Conservative associations that run each branch, right-wing intellectuals, by that read historians, who are absolutely innumerate, and who don't know any quantitative disciplines, and the working classes. Now, Powell spent his life as an MP in Smethwick, and then later as a unionist MP in Northern Ireland, doing this, practicing it. But it never really became a major force. He was always like Voldemort, trying to materialise, come back into life, and it never really happened. And of course, he was infamous for alleged racism, for his rivers of blood speech about West Indian and South Asian immigration in 1964-65 when he was member for Smethwick. But he represented a pure view, a sect, and that sect has caught on. It's never died away. Nigel Lawson gave us backing to it from the events of 1992, when there was that monetary crisis then in Britain. So the Tories have never really looked back. It's become a major trend in the Conservative Party since then. So they will want to be pure. These are ideologues. Then you've got the Tory pragmatists. The Remainers are soft because no one is ardent about Europe. There is no effective identification with Europe. There's only a utilitarian identification with Europe, or a pragmatic realpolitik one. But no one loves Europe. That's the case in Britain at large, but it's the case with the Tory Remainers. I think the result is, well, it was only 1.9% over the 50% mark. It's not that wonderful a result. 2 of the 4 constituent nations voted otherwise. Everyone's in a jam now. Everyone's stuck. It's a matter that the levers could well need the sanction and support of the Remainers to execute some form of Brexit. So you've got the hard levers who just want to drive and do a Thelma and Louise and go over the cliff and see what happens. Then you've got the muddle along ones. Maybe Theresa May, who was a very able, tough and intelligent woman, she could pull that together. What's happening right now in the Conservative Party is that the caucus is acting like an electoral college. And the kind of cross-cleavages and brokering is being done now that eluded the wider electorate, because you've all looked at the metrics. You should look at Lord Ashcroft's poll results, breaking it all down. You're aware of just how polarised this referendum was. There has not been a referendum in a major OECD country that's produced such polarised results by class, education level, age and everything. And the young have basically been cheated. So it's a very disturbing result, and a lot of the people who voted for Brexit will be dying or off the scene in 10 years' time. And where does that leave your generation? I'm not saying that Europe was perfect, but it was a way of getting on, and it does have what I think are credible reform plans, which they're trying to bring into place. Whereas these guys are improvising. So those are the two camps in the Conservative Party right now, and there are swingers, and a swinger by definition is not an ideologue. This is a problem that all centre-right parties have right now. Neoliberalism produced ideological sects and parties. It happens with the Australian Liberals, it happens here, it happens in the UK. But in the UK it's taken a particularly nationalistic form. My critique of Powell, apart from the fact that he was nasty and racist and all this sort of thing, and a malevolent genius, is that he should have been Hayekian. I have great respect for Hayek. I regard Hayek as one of the great political philosophers of the 20th century. But notice what I called him, a philosopher. I didn't call him an economist. I don't regard him as a dogmatic textbook of how to do economics. I think he's someone like Thomas Hobbes. You read him and read him and read him, and he helps you think about politics. But Powell, if he was Hayekian and really into the Austrian school and a real monetarist, he would have critiqued the state. But he doesn't. He never did. Nor do the Brexiteers now. They've got this poetic fantasy, this tub-thump panorama of a millennium of a power state on the River Thames. It's all Henry VIII. It's almost like Stalin worship with David Starkey of Henry VIII. Henry VIII is no longer a bastard. He's a great guy. He built the state. It's almost Russian, and it's the way they talk about Ivan the Terrible. Virgin Queen, the Stuarts. Cromwell's missing somehow. Cromwell's an embarrassment, like Mr. Gladstone. It's interesting who's in HMS Victory, Spitfires, and then there's a Führer screaming away in the middle of a wilderness somewhere. So there is this panorama of history, but this is about a particular power state that ran an empire, had global markets, and no one is critiquing that. And that's what I find unsatisfactory about this. The surprise of the referendum was that something came to light, something has come into the world that did not exist, we thought, before 23 June, and that is England. After 309 years, it's turned out to be an England independence vote comparable to the Scottish one. And I helped Mr Cameron with the 2014 Scottish referendum, but no one thought then there was an English political consciousness. And people as varied as John Prescott and the 7th Marquess of Bath, with all his concubines and everything, they were proposing a heptarchy of New Zealand-sized governments like the devolved Scottish government and Welsh government in England, but there was no appetite for it. Now suddenly we've got, to quote Richard II, Act 2, this England, that Enoch Powell used to rhapsodise. And what is it? It's a sort of a newborn chick chirping for food, and it's claiming to be that England. It's a big surprise. It has been unknown to the international relations system for 309 years. It was as dead as Prussia, we thought, between the 23rd of June. But Lord Ashcroft's polls are valuable because they reveal that the reason why perhaps the Brexit people won is that there were 3 interlinked narratives with strong semantic links. Think of a fasces, bundle of rods, and how they're bound together in ancient Rome, or as the fascist symbol. The first thing the poll reveals is that people wanted to take back control. This is the sovereignty thing. But ordinary people don't go around saying S words like sovereignty, but they will say, let's get back control. But sovereignty is always only known by what for, whether we're talking about Maori sovereignty, New Zealand sovereignty, or the sovereignty of an international organisation. It's about what it's for. What's it's for is the second thing that people polled, and that is they wanted to control immigration. So it was an anti-migrant surge. I saw it happen the bank holiday weekend of 31 May. There was just an explosion. And the I word just erupted everywhere. People became absolute imbeciles talking on the street out loud about it, regardless of their class. People forgot themselves and were just talking like blimps out loud about immigrants and Poles and everything else. People just went silly. It's as if there was a kind of seeking of solidarity. After long being 50-50 in the polls, suddenly people wanted to find a way to have solidarity. Immigration seemed the way to do it, and it became the narrative. And the third thing that Lord Ashcroft's polls reveal is they don't want the accession of Balkan nations. And that's where Turkey became, a new Battle of Lepanto. 78 million Turks are going to pour into England. So you've got the Mordor of Turkey. They really frighten. The British are real scream queens when they want to be, and they certainly were after 31 May. I reported to Treasury on 3 June that I thought Leave would win. And I said I thought they would win by 51%. And by 10 June, I thought it was 51.56, that sort of thing. So I wasn't far off. That's a good question, and I've been talking about that with people. Well, these are Tory boys and Tory girls. And the reason why, I have served in the centre-right party. And I make no apologies for having, but I've also served Labour. Centre-right people like power. You get power first, then you figure out what to do with it. The trouble is that the circumstances here are so complex. So much will unravel. No one knows really what to do. Traditional statecraft wasn't set up for this, and realpolitik weren't set up to handle complex international treaties like this. I think that the Leavers should need the help of the Remainers. These experts and technocrats whom Gove derided are going to be very necessary in Whitehall to even execute this. What happened in that campaign is that Grub Street journalists, with the stylistic prose of another age, overthrew the best technocratic and analytical skills of the modern age. It was a war. I think Britain has 3 problems. It has a failing governance model, which I alluded to before, in that it never reconfigured its domestic institutions of health, the NHS, welfare, police, and local government to cope with being in the EU. And it relied on the EU to be its exoskeleton, whereas Germany and France have fly-destroying machines. They zap people. It's very hard to get healthcare or to get welfare in those countries. So there's a lack of internal firewalls to disincentivise immigration. The other thing is, well, the poor British do have a good economy, and the second language of the world is English. So if you're Polish or Bulgarian or whatever, you're not going to go to France or Italy or Germany, are you? Let alone the Netherlands, you're going to go to England. And the Poles are having children in England as they are not having them in Poland. Poland is not that comfortable a country seemingly to live in. And they go to the areas where housing's cheap, and that puts them into competition with the traditional working class, who feel that they're being supplanted. And when you've got people like Lord Freud going around saying, oh, we've got to replace stock with fresh stock, that's the sort of class-based talk that has really offended and riled people. And ordinary people do know that they are despised and looked down upon in the regions. They know it. And so there's a visceral, it's a class-ridden society, but there's a visceral dislike. It's based on accent and how you compose yourself, and there are no vernaculars for these people. Well, there's the talk of having a Swiss or Norwegian relationship, but that would still mean they wouldn't be able to shut out immigrants. They still have to have, without being in Schengen, they still have the open labour market and all that sort of thing. So they won't be able to deliver on that, but I think there will be constraints. It'll be a nuisance, be a real nuisance. There's no security of property, tenure. If you want to live abroad, whose health system, whose pension schemes and all that, you're paying local taxes if you have a house. It's all going to be difficult now. So it's going to be far less mobile. I think what would work as a Brexit might be if there is a particular financial directives mechanism being developed called MiFID II to regulate financial transactions in Europe. And it's been the result of extensive and generous and patient consultation. Notice that's not popped up in the conversation. That's because there's a lot of buy-in from the City of London, as well as Deutsche Börse in it. And it should come into force in 2018. I think that if you had a sort of moderately Brexited Britain locked in with MiFID II, and maybe a stock market merger, as has been discussed, I think that would be sufficient. But there'll be nuisances for travelling. It just won't be the same. Well, this is one of the things that the Gove will be thinking right now. Gove will just be thinking to sort of just ram it through as quickly as possible. A vote of no confidence, well, the Labour Party's in a terrible state right now. Corbyn is in denial. There seems to be almost a personality disorder. It's very embarrassing. You know that they're considering who is the trademark to the name Labour Party. It's got as bad as that. But my joke about Corbyn is that he's like Edward VIII. Both men spent feckless decades and irresponsible decades pleasing themselves out in the wilderness. They spend 10 months at the top, go around saying something must be done, and then there's a great stink of a divorce at the end of it. So he's like that, and I don't think anyone's in a position to, if the Tories get their act together, I don't think anyone's in a position to do that. They should actually seek an election. The questions are right now is, will a government survive? Would it be a strong government? Will the Parliament last to 2020? And will the Union survive? And there's just so many imponderables here. And they will just let events sort it out. These guys, the thing about the people who follow Enoch Powell, who have the seats of Tory reason, is they believe in limited government, but also in limited reason. They're not children of the Enlightenment. They're not like the French and Germans. These are not heirs of 1789. They don't believe in totalitarian reason. They have a sense of limited reason and limited unreason. And that means that they won't come up with great synthesizing plans. They'll just figure it out as they go. That doesn't stop them from biting off big issues. But here's an example. The British do behave like this periodically. Think of what they did with the gold standard. They went off gold in 1916 for obvious reasons. They had to inflate the monetary supply for a war. This is after the Somme. But then Churchill had a Boris moment in 1925, and they went back on it. And then in 1931 they went off again because the world was crashing and burning. So they go off on, and when they get ideological in the Tory party, they're not very good at it. And it often doesn't stick. So it's possible that your generation might decide in the 2020s, as they gain political consciousness, to throw it off. Like, Europe won't let the UK back in if it leaves easily. But the question is, I've invoked Brendan Sims at my old college at Cambridge. He's a German expert. He's written very well about Germany. He's a Brexiteer, but he's a smart Brexiteer, in that he insists that Brexit should happen, but it should be done in a pro-European way, not an anti-European way, and that the future of the UK is with Europe, if not in Europe, and the future of the UK is in NATO. He's very strong about building bases in Poland and keeping up a credible deterrent and all this sort of thing. So there's an example of the kind of narratives, or sensible narratives. So when I said before that Powell had these right-wing historians, the modern counterparts of them are Brendan Sims, Simon Hecker, who wrote about Powell. His biography of Enoch Powell is the book to read. And of course Andrew Roberts, who's very well known and wrote a very good book on Napoleon last year. But the Napoleon in that book, whom Andrew Roberts admires, is precisely the EU. I think one of the big problems of Europe is that, why did it fail? There's all sorts of reasons, or why is it failing, or why is it perceived to fail? The unity of Europe as an imperial unity, it's not like Han Dynasty China. It's not like Mauryan or Gupta India or Abbasid or Umayyad Caliphate for Islam. Rome was other things. It controlled world islands, Asia, Africa, Europe. So it's like Halford Mackinder's argument about the Eurasian world island thing. He's the leading strategic thinker from the 1890s, but everyone from Moscow to Beijing to Washington to London's talking about Halford Mackinder. This is what the Chinese Silk Road project is about, is to cut right through Central Asia to Europe and turn everyone else into islands. It's called OBOR, One Belt, One Road. That's the project. So everyone's thinking in these terms right now. Gove wants to, and of course he's friends with Rupert Murdoch. So Britain will turn into the SS Rupertania. Europe will turn into Ruritania, and you've got the SS Rupertania. These people are purists. They're ideologues, and that's not exactly the Tory way. I mean, why I'm more concerned about the manner of the referendum debate beforehand than the result, because even if Leave had only got 49% or 49.9%, suppose a great big killer hurricane hit England, knocked down the trees, and 6 people died, and there was a low turnout. Suppose the result was 49.9% or 49%. It wouldn't have put the issue to bed. It would have gone on being an ulcer and gone on, and they would have demanded another referendum, and the country would still be held together by sellotape and rubber bands. So I was concerned about the manner of it, because the very assertion of an alleged British identity destroyed and subverted all the good things about being British. It was not fair. It was not fair. There was no good humour. There was no laughing at oneself. All humour just got burned up. There was no politeness. For a society that insists on being polite, there was no politeness. There was no compromise. There was no pragmatism. There was no transparency. All that was just burnt. I think the media, the fixed asset media, have a certain responsibility here, in that the blogosphere and the liquid media, as I call it, weren't able to countervail against it, and the sort of voters that voted for Leave aren't those that use those media anyway. But the fixed asset media, this Grub Street or Fleet Street media, they put up such a Wellington gale that the albatrosses and seagulls of reason could not take off, let alone the owls of Minerva. There were 2 deficiencies on the Remain side. If you look at the narrative blocks that we discussed that Lord Ashcroft identified, why the Leave thing was a sort of cycle of self-confirming arguments and narratives. All the 3 Remain narratives, they're all disconnected. So Cummings just drove right through the gaps in them. And there was no general on that side, and they kept talking about what seemed to the general population like abstractions, Project Fair, whatever. The BBC, I think basically you're looking at a media that was creating a market, that was making a market for itself. The BBC, I think, was shameful. The BBC is the Church of England now, and I think it threw itself in with the cultural lobby and protected its charter. My feeling is it was very much into the hey nonny nonny panorama of 1,000-year history stuff. And David Dimbleby was like a gentle vicar dabbing tea, spilt tea in interviews. Andrew Marr was like an earnest bishop talking to an atheist, like to Richard Dawkins. There was no Jeremy Paxman. You needed someone like Paxman to be an intellectual bunker buster and blast someone on screen like Gove apart. And that there was no one who was that powerful intellectually to do that, because I don't think anyone would have withstood Gove, would have withstood Paxman. You touched on a very important point, because I was arguing this morning to someone that the siren lure word here is sovereignty. So we in this room, we know how to use the word sovereignty. So the British people think they're asserting sovereignty now, but Brussels was attempting a supranational sovereignty project. So this business of having their own diplomatic corps and other things, it's harmless, but it's not what you needed in the middle of a credit crunch. And they were just building a big wedding cake for themselves. Yeah. It had nothing to do with life outcomes for ordinary people. So they were cultivating their own raison d'etre as a prospective government. Yeah. They lost touch with reality, and it had become a kind of magic mountain. What I sense about things is that Paris knew this would happen. Hollande, Valls, Macron all knew this would happen, and did like that. And they've jumped into an integration project. Then Paris knew it would happen. Brussels did not know it would happen. They were really quite stunned, which says something about their capacity. Or Berlin suspected it would happen. I kept emotionally distant because my role over there to reporting for the Treasury was in the New Zealand interest. And I only became angry on the 10th of June when Wolfgang Schäuble, the German finance minister, made what I thought was a respectful and considered intervention. He gave an interview which you can find in Der Spiegel, of the 10th, which you could get in English online, of the 10th of June. And I thought it was respectful of the British democracy. I thought it was respectful of the British public. It was offering offices. It was trying to be helpful. And he was demonised as the Emperor Dalek in the British press, from the Times down to the Sun. It was as if Hitler's finance minister, Hjalmar Schacht, had spoken. And I got angry. That's the only time I got angry. And then, of course, Joe Cox was assassinated. And I got angry again when Nigel Farage said, after the result was announced, England has attained its independence without a shot. And I thought he knew full well what he was saying. That was a deliberate erasure of a very good woman's life. So this is how burnt out their politics are. I mean, you have to understand one thing about the UK, is that New Zealand and the other New World societies have high civicism. This is a country that has worked through treaty issues and other issues because we have high civility, and we're almost civic republican. The Americans may not have our welfare system, but they too have it, and Fukuyama wrote about that in his book Trust in the mid-90s. Canada holds together with all those provinces, 2 settler nations, 3 First Nations by the same civil bonds. Australia, despite the fact that they have flash mobs and pogroms every now and then, there's a high civility there. But Britain doesn't have this. Look at what David Miller says, who's Professor of Politics at Nuffield College. The kind of civicism that the French take for granted and that we take for granted in the New World, the British don't have. And our ancestors came here to countries like this to have that civility as a critique of their homeland. I think that's an important part of our experience as, I wouldn't use the word colonials or settlers, but as New Zealanders, that we did that and recognised it in Maori. If a Brexit government is formed, radical or moderate or otherwise, well, we should put our best foot forward with an FTA process. I think we have to recover, without being cringing or anything or obsequious, we have to recover our a kind of love and affection for Britain, the sense of Androcles pulling out the thorn in the lion's paw, the little mice that nibble the ropes around Aslan. I think we should show friendship. We always were with them when they're in trouble, and they are in trouble. Like, the UK has failed. I think that in a dangerous world like this now, small, good countries like New Zealand or Norway or wherever should show authority and should show confidence and should show friendship. I don't think we should be judgmental. I think we should be professional. We should seek our best opportunities. I think we need to rebrand ourselves. This is a nativist Britain. Britain has rebranded itself in a nativist way. We have to rebrand ourselves in ways that those people will see us in. and we don't do quite a good job of that. Yeah, well, I've talked about that in the Treasury. I had it behind me on the wall, the flag of Newfoundland, which is the world's only postmodern flag, and it's a real shocker. It's all saltires and crosses exploding off in all directions. It's like a smashed windscreen of a Union Jack. And I said, well, that's Britain now. But we're going to have, perhaps in 10 years' time, the flag of a dead country on our flag and the canton of our flag. That could well be the case. And like Russia has the double-headed eagle, remembering the Second Rome, and Albania, and the old Union of South Africa had the flags of the Cape Colony, the Afrikaner republics, and Quebec cherishes the fleur-de-lis. We'll have a vestige flapping in the wind on our flag. So we will have to revisit all this. And the land, you know, Ted Hughes was a very fine poet, and he became poet laureate, and he wrote a very good poem for the Queen Mother's birthday, I don't know which one, 80 or 90 or whatever, called The Lands of the Lion. But these are all being dissolved now. It could be that all, you know, the end reign of Elizabeth II, all of this will come to an end. We have challenges too. We have opportunities too. We have what the British would respond to from us is they don't want us to be self-deprecatory. The British don't like self-deprecatory people. They like modest people. They like confident people. They like chilled out people. They want New Zealanders to be chilled out. They don't want us to be nervous. Nervousness is contagious. It's anxiety causing over there. And they want us to be, the kind of authority we can project is from having sound technique, good teamwork, doing deliverables, and having the imagination and intellect to go with that. They don't want us to be weird. They don't want us to be funny. They don't want a flight of the Conchords to happen in a boardroom. They find it very odd how we slide into that and how we play ourselves down, but they want confidence. And we're going to have to project ourselves in an entirely different way. It's pretty hard to say, isn't it? I mean, Russia is convinced. I mean, the Russians were dancing on the tables after in the Kremlin after the 23 June result, I bet. Russia has long said, oh, the world should be regionalised anyway. That's the Russian view. But that fits in with what I said about Halford Mackinder. He was the second director of the LSE in London. He lived in the 1890s, and he said, whoever controls the world controls a triangle going from St. Petersburg down to India and up the other way. So if the Urals roughly off-centre there. And so what you've got is Germanian military strategy being done. The OBOR, One Belt, One Road project, is driving right through, because one of the key things of Germanian military strategy is you have power by control of interior lines that divide bodies of your opponents. This is what everyone's doing. Everyone right now is cutting across each other's towpaths. This is what the islands in the South China Sea thing is about. This is what Russia in Georgia, Russia in the Ukraine, and all that is about. And they're doing it too. We're all doing it to each other. It's why at international conferences, the BRICS, will India fall off the BRICS? Will Brazil fall out of the BRICS? Where everyone's doing this pressure on each other. But what's at the heart of this, of Mackinder's, this is M-A-C-K-I-N-D-E-R. What's at the heart of it is that whoever controls that triangle turns the rest of the world into islands. This is British strategic thinking at the height of the British Empire, and it's become quite classic. Now, the Russians like it. There's a website that you should all look at, although your usage will be monitored by the Russians, called the Valdai Club. And it's a foreign policy discussion club, and they basically do what I've just done for the Treasury and New Zealand government all the time, and they send out signals, but they talk about the world being put into geo-regional blocks, and they think that would be a happier world. I would wait on the result of the American election, because that would be quite important. Trump and Putin, what will happen there, and what will happen with NATO, we don't know, because we've got a whole lot of characters out of a Batman film. I'm not saying Putin is out of a Batman film. Putin's actually very serious. He is in the line of Peter the Great. He sees himself in a line of Peter the Great, and he sees himself as the heir of the state, and he sees himself as the heir of a chancery tradition of realpolitik. Russia has always kept up big power geopolitics, no matter whether it became the USSR or went back to being Russia again. It's kept that craft up. It's never really become post-imperial. This is just a fact that we have to live with. So I respect Putin too much. That is, I have a healthy respect of Putin too much to compare him to that. But Trump, I mean, it's just mind-boggling. It's too soon to say. So I would hope not. But I do know this. There are sound projects in the EU right now that admit the mistakes made, that would pull it back together. And there are very good critics. The best critic of the EU, the most responsible critics, the ones who take responsibility. And I've never read a Brexiteer who had a more devastating critique of the weaknesses of the EU than Gilles Pisani-Ferry at the Heritage School of Government. So that's Pisani-Ferry. He's devastating. But he was opposed to Brexit. And there are very good plans to properly neutralise the euro, which has been the whole problem with it, to create the sort of structure that the Fed has in the United States, or that is the case with the pound. If the EU succeeds, and if it survives, and we're all alive and we're not blown up in 2020, it will be because an ECB project, a European Central Bank project, released by Jean-Claude Trichet, succeeded. It's because that succeeded. Because the ECB, I agree with a man called Lorenzo Bini Smaghi, who's on the ECB board. That's S-M-A-G-H-I. He's chairman of SNAM, which is now Italian for gas. He says the ECB neither created nor exacerbated the euro crisis. And I think that's correct. So it all goes back to Trichet, who was Draghi's predecessor, and it will be because that succeeded. There was a big row in 2010. Beware of going to the beach with a French head of state. Because in 1392, Charles VI had a schizophrenic breakdown and turned on his entourage and chopped them up and nearly killed his brother. So that's bad. And then Napoleon turned up at the beach at Fréjus in 1815, having escaped from Elba. And then Napoleon III met Bismarck at the beach at Biarritz in 1865, and they played with the imperial poodle Nero, and over champagne buckets and cigars discussed the war with Austria that Bismarck was getting a green light to do, and that sealed Napoleon III's downfall. And Charles de Gaulle went to Mururoa. That was his beach. But what happened at Deauville is that Sarkozy and Angela Merkel went to play, and they shut out Trichet, and they tried to break the Tefeu Treaty which prohibited the ECB from funding budgets, and they're only allowed to go and fish with secondary bond markets, that sort of thing. So there's not to be direct funding by the ECB of public finances. And they compromised that, and there was an almighty row, and Angela supported Trichet. But if it succeeds, it's because the ECB has succeeded in its project. If it does not succeed, it's because it failed. So that's a way I think of looking at it. I think there is no constitution that is not a fisc. That's where Alex Salmond failed in Scotland. Sturgeon might be able to answer that. One of the most interesting things in all this is that Lord Liddell, Roger Liddell, said he thought last year that Britain might well have to join a Euro Mark II in the 2020s, that they'll get it right and join that. Well, Sturgeon might do that. They might be in the Euro Mark II. I'm satisfied that this is a reasonable and feasible plan. It's not improvised. It's going somewhere. It's not just integration of government or fusion or denial of identities. I note the hazard of Marine Le Pen. She exclaimed after 23 June, she said last week, "Oh, isn't history beautiful?" Well, history is a dead planet. It's got a poisonous atmosphere. It's got high radiation levels, variable gravity. We can't live in it. We can't live in history. History is a wasteland with the Führer screaming out in the wilderness, and it's a kind of hell. It's like the singing detective Hitler on the Scarecrow yelling out in the field. But the sad thing is this, is that poetry does not stop a tank. It drives them. We learnt that with the Serb War, with the Bosnian War. We learnt that 20 years ago in the Balkans. Epics from the Battle of Kosovo were driving young men to go out to burn, rape, kill, and do other things. Poetry can be very, very dangerous, and people think they can inhabit and live in a national epic or a national story. And what's happened now is that a lot of decent, normal, natural English people want to live in our island story. They want to live in this fantasy from the BBC of costume drama and be part of all that. But I have been since the age of 19 a reader of the Italian liberal political philosopher Benedetto Croce, who lived from 1866 to 1952 and was head of the Liberal Party. He was put under house arrest by Mussolini for 18 years. And Croce said, well, there's no apostolic succession of nations. The people now in Italy are not the people in the Renaissance. We are not those people. We are something entirely different. So this chick that appeared in the world and hatched on the 23rd of June, that's not Merry England. It's not this England. It's not the England of Shakespeare or Henry V or anything. It's a reconstruct. It's retro. We can imagine, you and I, a utilitarian England that is a devolved unit of the Union, like Scotland is, and that could actually firewall things or do things like Canadian provinces do. You could imagine, as in Canada, provinces having to take migrants or bidding for them, and that would deter some immigrants from coming to Britain. They will find solidarity. Why people were pretty even Stevens in the polls up until that bank holiday weekend. There was the blip about Hitler. People will seek solidarity. When people are angry, they'll seek the most effective way to have solidarity. And it was sort of lost earlier in May when Boris used the Hitler word, and people sort of felt ashamed or put off. But then in that holiday weekend, it just became a massive surge. Turkey, immigrants, all of that. And people will seek solidarity because they want to be together. And I think ordinary British people found it intolerable that they had been told to go off in pairs and fight duels with each other. I think that was what was intolerable. It was too long a campaign. I spoke to a BBC czar, and he said to me, he's absolutely shocked and appalled, he said, it's like Deer Hunter. And that is what it's like. It became fatalistic, the whole thing. That's a good question, because there's a very eminent French commentator who writes in Le Monde, whom I recommend. He's one of my favourite French people, called Arnaud Le Parmentier. So it's Leparmentier. So Arnaud, he's super smart. He's one of these super smart Frenchmen. And he says, well, Brexit won't happen. Le Brexit n'aura pas lieu. It just won't happen. It can't happen. And the issue here, as a very good thinker, one of the great schools of political thought in the world right now is Italian. The Italians have brilliant jurisprudence, brilliant economics. They've had that since Pareto. They have brilliant constitutional thought, political thought since Machiavelli. And it's a nice, chatty, vernacular language like we New Zealanders use. And they're concise. I mean, I'm someone who doesn't lose his marbles, but I lose my eyeballs because I've read too many big books. But the Italian books are light and nice, and you can take them to the cafe, and they're so smart. And Sergio Fabrini, he says, well, there's no such thing as Europe. There's no such thing as the EU. It's just a collection of treaties, and you can share off bits here and there, but he said there is no Europe to get rid of. You see, when Boney won the Battle of Austerlitz, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Franz II, abolished it and abolished himself and became Emperor Franz I of Austria. No one can do that with the EU. It can't vote itself out of existence. It can't put itself down. Unless all 28, 27 or whatever do that. So there's no way in which there's a sovereignty that can disperse itself. Elizabeth I said a very wise thing. She said, England will never die. England is a beast that will never die unless it kill itself. And this is very pertinent for now. Because what's emerged? A basilisk, a cockatrice. Because I'm satisfied that there is a European project that can be done. I can't say I'm certain it will work, but I think they know what they're doing, despite the Law and Justice Party in Poland and all those people. But everything of England, of a successor state for the UK, all of that is to be invented and done. It's great for the culture industry. It's great for the BBC or the EBC, whatever it becomes, or the Scottish equivalent. It's great for the arts. It's great for film. It's great for everything else. But what about people paying mortgages? What about an economy that has to take a hit? And it's a huge effort, rebuilding civility and civil society. I mean, I compare what's happened in Britain now. The only thing, I've been very sparing about using history in this discussion because I think history's run out of road. And I am an historian by training, constitutional historian, and so I'm using an asceticism against myself. But one thing comes to mind is that we're looking at a coup, like the Whig coup of the Glorious Revolution in 1689. That took months for William of Orange and the Whig peers to get rid of James II and put in a new regime. It took about 5 months. Whether this now is a glorious or an inglorious revolution is yet to be seen, but it's going to require a whole lot of figuring out just how to do it. And of course that was an anti-Europe project. There's a TV series that is a hit in Britain right now, which is young people like it. It's also soft porn, called Versailles. And it's about Louis XIV. And it's got very nice theme music, which I let my children see, though I don't let them see the rest of the program, by M83. So it's got the M83 outro theme, and it's very nice. So I'm the king of my own land. Tempests of dust. This is an anti-EU project. The 1689 was an anti-Europe project, was saying no to the absolutist state, and the British decided to break with the continent and go down a different path altogether. But what this other path is now, we don't know. Because is it hyper-globalising? Well, as you've pointed out, things look more protectionist, and a lot of the Brexiteer program is protectionist. They've got a patrimonial protectionism of the agricultural sector. Lords and dukes have been promised the cap plus. They've also wanted an amendment for the Queen's speech to protect the NHS from the TTIP. So these people it's all about power, and a rancorous feud equivalent to a Norse saga, and what bearings it has to Enoch Powell or Nigel Lawson or whatever may be quite approximate. I think the Labour Party moment misfired there. Like, I think the nadir of the 2015 campaign for Labour was when Ed Miliband went to see Russell Brand. And he came in his limo, and it just was a very bad look. And he thought he was winning over young votes because St. Russell or St. Rasputin or St. whatever was marketing himself as some kind of philosopher or guru. And it just looked very bad, and that was meant to be appealing to young people. Then you had Momentum and the Corbyn moment, which has now utterly failed, and is just parked Labour in the middle of nowhere. So I think that's a big difficulty that they have there. So people haven't really had the confidence. See, Dominic Cummings is not interested in the young. Labour ought to be interested in the young, but even Dave in Downing Street, he's smart. Vernon Bogdan has said to me he was the very best PPE student, politics, philosophy and economics student he ever had. And Dave would have wanted to, but the thing is, he didn't know how. And people were also put off, I think, a bit by the Brand experience and the Momentum experience. It's because of the weak civicism of British society. But this sort of fora, I mean, someone who is good is Owen Jones. I got a lot of time for Owen Jones. He says, I think, sometimes some silly things, but I think he's courageous. I think he's brave. He appears in The Guardian. He is a gay activist, but he's also a genuine socialist. But he talks about a whole lot of things. He talks in a very highly labile, laddish way. He's a very attractive and honest character. He did podcasts and the like with Russell Brand, which I thought were wrong. And I thought Jones was real, Brand was wrong and false. So they're going to have to really get it all together, and have the young communicating with each other. The whole point of being a young professional and a graduate is to build a world together. You have to build habitable worlds for yourself when we have failed. You have to build a world for yourself. And also, I say to young people who turn up at the middle common rooms of Oxford colleges, 23 to 30-year-olds, I say you're here to think what it is only you can think as you do your doctorates. This is the privilege and the joy and the challenge of it and despair of it. You have to think of a new world. And British society hasn't allowed your coevals that kind of space, that kind of time. So you can ponder on that, on the implications for that. But my lesson for New Zealand is that you must make up your minds, you must become of a mind, you must build a world. You must build a world that's related to what it is to be a small, good country with authority, that's economically viable, just and fair, rule of law and all that. And you've got to assert your space. You've got to use the liquid media, the new media. You've got to use music. You've got to politicise your music. I'm not saying you have to do rap or anything like that, and I'm certainly not going to become like Kim.com or anything like that. But you've got to figure out ways for yourself of how to do this. In my time, we might have gone off and written a short story and put it in the Listener. How naff. But you would have better ways. But you've got to find ways to communicate with each other to do this. So that's my advice. You've got to insist on your space, because your British counterparts and my young children have all been cut out of something that they were born into. Don't let the door be slammed on you. I'm not saying how the door could be slammed on you. That's not my business here today. But just insist on your space as a generation.